The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.
Sarah Steelman has participated in some of Missouri's highest-profile statewide contests. While she's not running for anything this year, she has a lot to say about Missouri's political climate. The Republican joins us next on another edition of Politically Speaking.
9, 8, 7,
6, 5, 4,
3, 2, 1.
I think that is fair to say.
Hands to kiss and babies to shake. But
I think my record speaks for itself.
That's a really good question.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rosenbaum, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio in St. Louis today is
colleague Joe Mannies.
And coming all the way from beautiful Rolla, Missouri, in scenic Phelps County, we have as our very special guest today
Sarah Steelman,
a former state treasurer, former state senator, and
a former candidate for governor.
And U.S.
Senate.
And that's the reason we're having her on today. We've been going through this crazy election cycle where every statewide office is up for grabs except the U.S. Senate. And we thought it would be good to bring in somebody who's been through the fire before to provide their perspective on what it's like to run for statewide office, as well as their reflections on past and current politics.
Actually, I got to correct you, though, because there is a U.S. Senate seat that's up. It's just not in the primary.
It is, and Blunt is running for re-election. All the statewide offices, we're talking governor.
You're talking about open. Okay.
Yes.
I'm glad you did that because
I
was.
Our listeners to be clear.
Well, we're a little.
I was going to remind everybody about that one.
We are confusing on the Politically Speaking podcast
because we get in the weeds, and sometimes we have to whack them up.
So we're hoping to have former state auditor Susan Monty on the show to provide the Democratic perspective in either later this month or in August. But before we go any further, for people that don't know who you are, just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in politics, and I guess Joe's going to ask you where you went to high school, so I'm just going to short-circuit her there.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, right now I'm actually an assistant teaching professor at MST, teaching economics, macroeconomics. So working backwards from there, I of course ran, as you said, in the different statewide races, was state treasurer for 4 years. And then when Matt Blunt decided not to run for governor, suddenly that was a big shock to everybody.
Yes, I remember that.
I decided to get in that race.
Not to bring back too many bad memories, but didn't he announce he wasn't running again on the same day you announced you were running for re-election?
This is true. You have a very good memory.
It's hard to forget that day because it was, I still think, one of the most shocking moments for me in Missouri politics. My window is a little bit narrower than Joe's, obviously, but I was totally taken by surprise. What was your reaction when that happened?
I was completely taken by surprise. I remember we had made the first announcement at my parents' house in Jefferson City around the kitchen table that I actually got. You asked me at where I got my interest in politics. Well, that's where it comes from. Talking politics with my mom and my dad, my brothers, and my friends. And so then we were driving to Rolla to do the next one, and it was somewhere in between there that somebody called me and said he's not going to run again. And I was just...
Wasn't it in the winter? I keep thinking it was January.
It was in mid-January.
January
good.
26th.
That's what I thought. Hopefully my age hasn't caught up with me yet, but good. Yeah,
and then the transmission in my car went out. I completely stopped. Couldn't get to Rolla. It was a weird day.
I have to ask this, and we may eventually be able to ask this of former Governor Blunt. Do you think he did that on purpose? Because I know that you and him didn't have the best relationship.
I've always kind of felt like he did, or somebody on his campaign staff planned it that way. I have no documentation of that at all. Yeah. It's just my gut feeling.
Yeah, well, because I had heard from somebody at the time, and I won't say who it is because they're still pretty prominent. They had told me that then Governor Blunt had called them that morning and told them what he was doing, and they're like, what? And that supposedly, I mean, these are people that were fairly connected and high up, and they were stunned. So who knows? But he was just supposedly he just kind of felt, I'm done with that. I want to move on. Sometimes that happens with people.
It does.
And
it really does.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've seen some politicians where they've stayed too long, where they were past that, and they were just kind of, And then other times, some people leave too early. And as we have a case in Indiana, my home state, where Evan Bayh is now trying to come back.
I saw that. I saw your shocking tweets.
Actually, I talked to him back in '95 at Democrat Days in Hannibal back in the day. I remember sitting around the pool talking to him.
Yeah. So you first ran for office in 1998 for a state Senate seat that was held by a Democrat in
a 20-year incumbent. Senator Michael Eibauer.
Yeah.
That was actually the beginning of the takeover of the Republicans.
Of rural Missouri.
Yeah. I think I won, and then we had in 2000 two more. For a while we were, I served in the minority and the majority in the state Senate, which was great. It was a good learning experience for me, and I appreciate those 2 years in the minority. And then for a while we were even. Remember, we had co-chairman, one Republican, one Democrat, and then we had a special.
Yeah,
took over.
That was
famous
the
one in Hannibal.
Yeah, that was the one with John Cawthorn taking over the 18th senatorial district. It's interesting you mentioned that because I started reporting professionally about 10 years ago during the 2006 election cycle, and that seat, the 18th district seat, and your old seat, the 16th district seat, were won that cycle by Democrats. Frank Barnett's won for your old seat. Wes Schumeyer won for Cawthorn's seat. Now, those seats in 2014 weren't even contested by Democrats.
Right.
It's gone so far in the other direction that Democrats are just kind of demoralized. Why do you think it's happened during that relatively short period of time?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One is redistricting, which I think is at the root of a lot of problems in our country, the way we do redistricting. But talking about being in the weeds, that's in the weeds.
No, but that's okay. That's our listeners.
But secondly, I think it's also you have the extremes of both parties, and the extremes of the Democrats are ridiculous now. So my 16th senatorial district used to be Democratic, and the 8th district in general was, it was fairly Democratic.
The 18th district,
the 8th district.
Oh,
well, she's talking about 8th congressional district.
Oh, yes.
It was old-time conservative Democrats.
Right.
Well, I would put Michael Eibauer, Danny Staples, those guys into that conservative Democratic category. Those people don't exist anymore.
Oh, yeah. Back when I covered in the Washington Bureau, the Post-Dispatch back in the early 80s, this is back when there was 10 congressional seats for a period. And, the 8th and the 10th, which were basically southeast and central south rural Missouri. And, of course, you had the 9th, as I mentioned, Volkmer, which is the northeast. These were all, one of them was held by, Wendell Bailey captured one. But, and then Bill Emerson captured one. And I was around earlier when Bill Emerson had captured that seat from Burleson, who had been a Democrat.
Right.
And so you could see where it was closing in, where the movement started sort of in southeast Missouri, and then it just kind of gradually spread to northeast. Mel Carnahan was from Rolla, your home, and he was a very prominent Democrat and was in many cases, I would say, the brain trust of the Democratic Party for a while before his death. And you've just seen the dynamics change so much.
You could actually see it with him. He really moved to the left, further to the left than when he started. And so now you've got this very divisive. They have no place to go, those conservative Democrats. So they're in the Republican Party.
That was going to be my question, because we're now at a point where Republicans hold unprecedented majorities in the House and Senate. I'm sure when you came into the legislature, I guess, in early 1999, you probably wouldn't have imagined a scenario where there were 117 Republicans in the House and 26 or 25 Republicans in the Senate. Do you think that Republicans need to be careful and make sure, they solidified those gains? Or is it a possibility that some of those rural parts of the state that were Democratic that went Republican could revert to form if they're not careful, basically?
Okay, well, I'm more old school. Okay, so I think actually government works better in this state when we're closer in the majority and minorities, when people are forced to compromise on issues. Now, I mean, I'm a conservative and I'll stand by my core principles till the day I die. And I've filibustered a lot of things in my time that I believed in. But our system of government is designed to sit down and reach compromises and solve problems. And I think when we have such extreme majorities on either side, because David, my husband, served when there were very few Republicans.
Right.
Yeah, in fact, we need to mention this.
Yeah.
I mean, segue here. Your husband is David Steelman, who's a prominent lawyer in the Raleigh area, but he also had run for Attorney General back in '92, and that's how I met him.
Yeah.
And his family, the Steelman family, has a long history in politics, separate from you. But, I mean, in all fairness, we need to mention that, although your career has been really very separate, other than he has provided some support, I'm sure, from time to time. I remember standing in the back of the room different times when he's critiqued your speeches to me.
That should be entertaining.
And he's still
certainly was to me.
Yeah. And he's still active in politics now, or at least in policy now. He is a member of the UM System Board of Curators. Interestingly, and we were discussing this off mic, even though your husband and Jay Nixon were not the best of friends in the early 90s,
92 election.
The governor has tapped him to be part of the Mosers Board and the Board of Curators, which are not exactly minor offices, so to speak.
Right. And I respect Governor Nixon for doing that, picking good people from the opposing party who are interested in good government and making sure that we have that. And I've actually discussed that with Governor Nixon. I think it was after one of my losses. But, that's got to be our first interest. And I hate it when we deviate from that.
I mean, which shows there may be hope for Kurt Schaefer and Josh Hawley in 10 years.
We've
you never
about
know.
that.
Let me tell you. Look, when I covered the Steelman Jay Nixon race in '92, I figured those guys would never, ever speak, much less even walk down the same street together. Let me tell you,
Let
it
alone
got
being
really
appointed
nasty.
to Mosers Board or the UM
Correct,
System Board of
correct.
Curators.
And now they're, chatting around. And
Yeah. Well, but this is what I wanted to segue into. You've run for 3 statewide offices. You've run for treasurer in 2004, which you were successful for, during what I would classify as a very good year for Republicans.
Yeah. Yep.
You've run for governor in a pretty intense gubernatorial primary where you came a little bit short for that. And then you ran for the U.S. Senate 4 years ago in a 3-way race that was also pretty close, but you fell short in that one as well. So just generally, as somebody who has run for statewide office before, give the listeners kind of a perspective on what it's like, sort of the rigors that it entails.
What lessons you learned.
And what lessons that you've learned over the years.
Oh, gosh, I don't think we have time for all that, but I'll try to condense it. Yeah, I mean, it's very challenging to run a statewide race. And I would say that the governor's race was in particularly hard because I had everybody against me, the entire establishment and everybody that goes along with that word, which now nobody really knows the definition of. Back then, it really was the party. I mean, the party apparatus was working against me.
Yeah, they wanted Kenny Holshoff, who was the congressman.
Yes.
Yeah, the 9th district, which at that point, I mean, anyway, they wanted Holshoff,
And
who took in Columbia and some other parts. And you were not supposed to be doing this.
Right. I wasn't supposed to do it. And Kip Bond was against me,
Right.
which really motivated a lot of money against me. And it was hard. So it was challenging to raise money under those circumstances. And, you just have to take your ideas straight to the people, which is what we did. And we really came close.
I don't remember what the percentage was, but I think it was like 48-44, which
Yeah.
suggested that the fact that you were a statewide entity already, and B, the fact that you were vigorously contending for this, it showed that those had advantages as well, because you didn't, even though the establishment, as you said, was probably for Congressman Hulshoff at the time. They were. I was there along with Joe. You didn't actually do that badly considering the circumstances. So what lesson does that show, that maybe all the establishment support doesn't really mean a whole lot in the end, considering Congressman Hulshoff ended up losing pretty badly to
Well,
Jay Nixon?
and they had chased Kinder out.
Right.
In that winter before. I'll never
Right.
forget that very clearly at Lincoln Days.
After he crossed the Rubicon.
After you
Yes.
crossed the Rubicon.
one of Peter's delightful little quotes. But, just from a candidate's perspective, it showed me that it's possible to beat, to eventually beat the establishment. I think if you look at now, over these past 8 years, what's happened is that was like the beginning of beating up on the way it is, the status quo. And now we're to a point in an election with Trump and even the governor's race here in Missouri with the outsider, Eric Greitens, who I'm supporting, and others in the race, Bruner, that people are actually looking to shake up the status quo, and they're ready for it. It takes a while to get, I saw it then, but it takes a while for the people to catch up with consistently fighting it to get through. And I think we can do that this year.
Now, the fact that 2004, 2008, and 2012 are presidential election years. And, of course, 2008 and 2012, when you lost the primaries, the presidents or the wannabes weren't on the ballot yet. But still, there's the atmosphere. I'm just wondering how... Whereas 2004, Bush was running for re-election, it was, all about, security and Republicans, strong year. Whereas 2008, you could see kind of the wave even months ahead of time. I'm just curious, what impact do you think that had on your race, even though Obama wasn't on the ballot in August, but still there's the atmosphere. I'm just wondering.
Joe, in all honesty, I don't think it has much in a primary.
Okay.
The Republican primary is a strange animal in this state. There are so few people who really get out and vote in it. In fact, you never know, who's actually going to remember to go vote in August. It's a strange time. It's different from other states. It's so close to the general election too, but it's, everybody's going back to school or it's summertime. It's really those diehards that either, are committed to against a candidate or for a candidate who get out and vote. I think we saw that in the U.S. Senate race. Todd Aiken had a lot of committed voters, and he got them out to vote. So it's a different kind of animal. Now in the general, that's totally about the presidential race.
The other thing that's changed, because in 2004 there were campaign finance limits for statewide candidates. In 2008,
Yes.
I think that was right at the edge of when they got taken off. I mean, I think statewide campaigns have always been pretty expensive, and you can find ways around campaign finance limits with legislative district committees or PACs or whatnot. But, I mean, there has to be a different dynamic now where candidates are getting $1 million donations from people and able to, fund their primary candidacies pretty quickly. I mean, what's kind of your perspective on that shift, especially when you consider you've run under basically both systems before?
Yeah, I think the money in politics is the biggest problem the state and country faces, because basically we have elections that are being bought and paid for. And the political class, and by that I mean the professionals who make money off of campaigns, are the ones who are benefiting from this. And so it's no longer about ideas like it used to be. And I sound like an old timer. But even when my dad and Dorman, David's dad, were in politics, they were in it for the ideas. They would never in a million years think of making any money off of it. They wanted to elect somebody who represented their ideas in government. Now we're totally away from that. I will say in the governor's race, this is what we see playing out, and then it gets really nasty using that money. We see, these attacks, which is about that time of the year when this happens, but these gratuitous attacks by Bruner against Greitens are completely pulling down the level of discussion in our political process today. So he's not talking about ideas, whereas Eric Greitens is trying to talk about ideas. And I think we need to get back to that. But the only way to get back to that is to try to get some of the money out of politics.
Now, how would you do it?
Yeah, because even Greitens has gotten some big donations that he's obviously been criticized for. He may need to do that because he's not in an elective office right now, but
and he's not self-funding like Brunner.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, even he is kind of falling into that situation where he's taking huge donations too.
Because he has to.
Because he has to.
But he has a variety of donations all over this country of different levels. We see some candidates like, Catherine Hanaway and Peter Kinder getting funded by sole source funders. And not that I have anything against those contributors. They're exercising their
And I think
free
Rex
speech,
Sinkfeld
but-
supported you in the past, but
Yeah,
continue.
But you have to ask yourself, what are they accomplishing? And if you look at the big picture, we no longer have this discussion of ideas. Look at what these ads are that we're watching. Look at what happened yesterday with that video that was posted against Eric Greitens that was a total fabrication, totally fabricated, and put on Facebook by Brunner's people just to discredit him. I mean, to what length will people go now to destroy another person's career and reputation instead of discussing issues?
Right. We don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, to be fair to the other candidates, because there's been stuff slung around on all sides, and off the air, you and I can talk about some of this. But yeah, it still adds to the climate, and does. Do you think it discourages, looking at it just from a broader sense, do you think it discourages voters? Do you think it discourages people from thinking about running if they're going to run into this, unless they're worth a gazillion bucks?
I absolutely think that voters are disgusted with the amount of money in politics and what it is spent on. The negative ads and these so-called professional consultants who all they're interested in is basically making money for themselves, is profiting off of it. And so I think that's all part of the status quo that needs to go. And that you see the people now riling up against the establishment who has created this professional class of politicians. With Trump, you see it. He found,
Yeah, I was going to ask a broader question, because you see a crop of candidates running this cycle who are well-funded by whichever source, but they've never run for political office
and that
before.
Includes Greitens,
It includes Greitens. Brunner has run before against you, obviously, but he's never been in elected office. Bev Randles has never been in elected office. Josh Hawley has never been in elected office. On the Democratic side, Pat Contreras, who's running for treasurer and who may very well be the nominee, has never run for office before.
And plus the Democratic candidates for Secretary of State.
Two of them haven't. So you have a whole crop of candidates from both sides who have no electoral experience running for statewide office. When you ran for statewide office in 2004, you had been a state senator. You had that legislative experience. So this is just more broadly getting out of the morass of the governor's race. If a lot of these people win statewide offices and they've never held elected office before, what should Missourians expect? Should they expect maybe more out-of-the-box thinking because they're not part of that Jefferson City culture and class? Or could they run into some institutional barriers that may make it harder for them to do their jobs?
Well, again, I think it depends on the candidate. If they have the right experience that can translate over into whatever job they're seeking. I will say, like Eric Greitens can translate easily over into becoming governor with his skills in leadership and team building and making executive and quick decisions. That translates. It may not translate for every candidate. I honestly think it's based upon the skills and background of the candidate. Outsiders, I think, do bring a fresh look to old problems.
So what's your thoughts about Trump, just in general? We're recording this before the Republican convention, but not only a few days before. I'm just interested in your take on it. Do you plan to go to Cleveland just kind of what are your thoughts as far as how this contributes to the climate or not, since Trump is an outsider who has never won elective office before?
Well, no, I'm not planning on going to Cleveland, and I have a love-hate relationship with Trump. So
explain. I'm curious.
One day I like his style and his take no prisoner, I'm going to shake things up kind of attitude, but then he says something ridiculously stupid, and then I don't like him, and so it overall, I completely understand why he is where he is, because the people in this country are fed up with the system as we know it today. So to that extent, it does contribute in the primary. I think you do see that attitude translating over into primaries, which is why we have so many outsiders running.
Joe and I have kind of gone, we actually, I think, are on the same mind of this, but we've been talking about this for a while, about Trump's impact on the general election, because as of now, I haven't seen any polling and when I say polling, I mean serious recent polling, that suggests to me that Hillary Clinton is leading in Missouri or has a chance to win Missouri. But I think, as you mentioned, Trump has been so prone to these controversial statements, whether it be his statements against John McCain a few months ago, whether it be his statements against certain ethnic groups, or against the judiciary. It kind of raises alarm bells about his temperament, which may make it more possible for Clinton to do well in Missouri. So in the general election, if Trump only wins the state by a couple of percentage points,
which is what I've been saying,
could that actually be bad for Republicans, given that we saw a scenario in your most recent election cycle where Mitt Romney won by 10 percentage points? There were other things, obviously, affecting the down ballot.
The U.S. Senate race,
well,
but arguably, arguably, the Aiken-McCaskill race had more impact on the down ballots, than Romney did.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as you look at this one, because I've had some top Democrats tell me that if Trump even if he carries the state, but if he does so by less than 5 percentage points, they think actually that sets up that can really help them on the down ballot side. Now, as a Republican, I'm just interested in your take on this, and especially since you've run statewide before so many times, even if they weren't primaries, you still have a sense of how this can play out.
I think that makes sense. I think that the lower the margin, I think Trump will win Missouri, but I think when you cut into the margin that he will have, then it becomes much more competitive in some of the down ticket races, probably the governor's race mostly. Governor's
race, maybe attorney general's race, maybe the U.S. Senate race. But I think once you get below that, I don't know. It really depends, because you could make an argument the fact that Bush did well in 2004 was one of the reasons you might have won, though it could have also been the fact that you had better organization, name recognition, money than the Democratic candidate you were running for. So I guess my point of this rambling expose is there's a lot of different variables that end up with the results, essentially.
There really are. But I think if he has a wide margin in Missouri, then I think you'll see a Republican sweep of offices.
I think it's certainly possible.
Yeah, because I think sometimes people, and I'm going to just mention this briefly, people are assuming that Chris Koster will be the Democratic nominee, and that at least he'll be in a strong position in November because of the money. Doesn't mean he's going to win. But my point is, I think some people have been looking at this, stepping back a bit. He doesn't have that much name recognition. He has a lot of name recognition within the political class, even though he has won election twice. My point being is that sometimes I'm interested in your take on this. Sometimes candidates and politicians in Jefferson City, because they're well known in Jefferson City, they think they're well known, period.
Yes.
And I've seen time and time again where they've crashed and burned on the election day because the rest of the state is like, who?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm interested in your take on this.
In David's attorney general race against Bill Webster, who had a lot of press. He did press conferences all the time when he was attorney general. I think he got his first poll back, and his name ID was at like 18%, which is very low.
Right.
So, and that was shocking to me because I figured, oh, everybody knows who he is. And I think you're right. I think people fall into that trap so easily. Nobody knows.
I mean, that's why very few Missouri House speakers have won statewide election.
Exactly.
They think they've got, I've seen so many on both parties, they think they've got it going into the fall.
More recently in 2008, Michael Gibbons, who was the top senator, lost to Chris Koster, who was, even when he was a Republican, was not really high up in leadership. I think he was in leadership, but not a very prominent position, essentially.
Yeah, but Koster may have won in 2008 because of the Obama effect.
But
continue.
But
go ahead.
Well, this is why in any statewide race, you have to be on TV or you're non-existent.
Yeah.
So that's why it comes down to such a a money race too, because it costs a lot of money to stay up on TV, and negative ads have an effect on people. That's why people can complain all the time about how they hate them, but they certainly respond to them.
Yeah, isn't it the reason they're expensive is because media outlets are charging a lot of money for them to be aired, essentially? I mean, I don't, this is kind of a wacky opinion here because we are in the media here, but I think that when often media people complain about money in politics, they don't talk about the fact that it's expensive because TV stations and radio stations and radio or newspaper entities are charging a lot of money for these ads to be on.
Oh, yeah.
I don't envision a situation where they say everybody gets to be on the air for free. But I think that there is kind of dual responsibility here. I mean, what's your thought on that?
Yeah,
Joe?
now, just this little thing here. We're public radio,
We
so
are
we
public
don't have
radio.
ads.
We are
So
a
it
little
doesn't matter.
biased.
So we don't get all this.
But-
and that's fine. That's fine. That's why I work for public radio.
But I mean, that hasn't really been brought up a lot when you talk about money in politics.
Although there's not as much, I remember, this is about 20 years ago, I really focused on how much, I think it was the 92 race, where I spent a lot of time going to the stations and looking at the contracts and stuff. And I've been checking lately, and while the rates have gone up some, really when you take inflation into account, it's not as much.
My last question for you, because I know that you got to run soon. Will you ever run for anything again?
Well, I always leave the door open.
Yeah.
I'm happy doing what I'm doing right now, and I like actually, I had not intended to get involved in a primary this year, but I read Eric Greitens' book Resilience, and then I heard that he was interested in running for governor. I thought this guy would be fabulous as governor. His experience is beyond reproach and perfect for this position, and decided that he was the guy that I was going to support. So I wanted to get on board and help him, and I am helping him this year. And I will say I got to say I'm amazed by the attacks that are coming against him from Bruner.
Now just switching a little bit before, you were in Jeff City off and on for quite a while. So, Jeff City's come under fire the last couple of years for the atmosphere there, especially the way women are treated, either who work there or hold public office. I'm interested in your take on that because I know that you came under a lot of, scrutiny or whatever, because you're a woman office holder, attractive, and there was just a lot of stuff, that people were always throwing at you. And I'm just interested in your take on looking back, but also the current situation where you've had several major office holders who have had to leave because of inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, well, that's very unfortunate that they did what they did. It's, I guess, did I get sexually harassed when I was, probably yes, but it wasn't in a way that I took offense at. I think it's always kind of in the eye of the beholder to a certain extent. I can't really understand all this. The preoccupation with it in Jeff City, I do think, is detrimental to women who really have true sexual harassment against them. So I don't like to trivialize it at all. Part of it is a generational thing. Like I said, I served with a bunch of state senators who were much older than me, different. My dad's generation, they look at women a little differently. So some people might interpret that as sexual harassment. I didn't. I just appreciated, where they were coming from. What I don't like to do is trivialize the real harassment out there that occurs, because it does occur. And so I guess that's the extent of my comment on that.
Well, we're going to leave it there. We appreciate you coming by. And for all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. You can follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES.
I believe you're active on Twitter again. How would we follow you on Twitter or any other way?
Sarah _ Steelman,
Yes.
I believe it is.
That is correct. I checked before the show happened. We'll be back next time. Until then, so long.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.